So first up we have Dr. Fiona Kwok, who is a haematologist, and she is with the Westmead Amyloidosis Centre and has done a lot of really amazing work for amyloidosis. She's going to be talking about Australian updates on AL and ATTR in clinical trials. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, okay. A little bit of stress while I work this out. Okay, easy. Oh. So a lot has happened in terms of the availability of treatment in Australia since our last amyloidosis workshop 2 years ago. If you'd asked me 3-4 years ago, what do we actually have that people can actually get on Medicare to treat their disease, I would have said we have nothing. So the years leading up to the current many programs that are opening up were very difficult for patients, to say the very least. So I'd like to just illustrate here for AL, daratumumab in combination with other medications for those with newly diagnosed light chain amyloidosis came on to what we call the Public Benefit Scheme program. So that's Medicare to you and I. Doctors could prescribe it if you had newly diagnosed light chain amyloidosis. And that program opened on the 1st of January in 2023. And then, as you can see in the blue, 3 medications on Medicare programs starting from the 1st of May in 2024 with tafamidis. And patisiran followed afterwards. That date's a little inaccurate, I apologise. And then only last week, vutrisiran for those with hereditary TTR with neuropathy. So they've all got different, what doctors call indications, or people that they're actually eligible for it. And this is actually based on the original clinical trials. So for tafamidis, you need to have cardiac or heart transthyretin, any type. Can be hereditary, can be wild type. And you actually have to have symptoms of your disease. You have to have a certain thickening on your heart scan, because these are the people that were studied where it was proven to extend their lives and to slow down the amount of amyloid that goes to their heart. And then for patisiran and vutrisiran, essentially vutrisiran is going to replace patisiran. It's a much easier to deliver, i.e. injection in the belly every 3 months. Genetic therapy, which actually switches down your body's production of making the transthyretin. And this has been proven in people in clinical trials, which I'll talk about later, the concept of clinical trials, who actually have hereditary transthyretin that is targeting their nerves. And again, as cruel as it sounds, you do require a certain amount of nerve damage to be eligible, because again, this is where the research has been done and we can safely say it's safe and effective. So what are the other ways to access or get treatment? So what did we do when we had no treatment? It was based on clinical trials. So all of those drugs that you see now that are on Medicare programs, doctors around the country made sure that we screened the trials, or the research was being done around the world, and we looked at our centre's patients and we said, what drug do we think is going to work for our patients? Let's sign them up onto these trials. And for all of these trials, patients in Australia have been enrolled in clinics around Australia to contribute to proving that they work and to contribute to getting them onto Medicare. Other less common and often very difficult or very small programs or ways to access therapy is what is termed a medicine access program. So for tiny windows of time, for reduced fees, sometimes pharmaceutical companies will offer their medication at a reduced fee or occasionally for free. In reality, honestly, it's just before they know that a program is going to open. The the actual committee, who's called the Public Benefit Advisory Committee, who decide if a drug or assess if a drug can be put onto a Medicare program. Once they know that their drug has been approved, they go, okay, it's going to take a while before the program is actually up and going, and I'll explain that later. So we'll open an access program. And then lastly, and usually financially not at all feasible for patients, to be honest, is self-financing. So tafamidis, for instance, 130,000 US per year, just as an example. So you might say, look, why is it that it takes, a common question I get is, why don't we have drugs, more drugs on Medicare? Why is it taking so long? I've read that XYZ works really well. Well, there's a process, and this is actually how a drug gets assessed by the committee for whether it should be and can be on a Medicare program. So there is a federal government committee, they're called PBAC for short. They consist of a range of people. Obviously, there's medical personnel on there, and they also have a finance committee to see if the country can afford it and to also do the negotiations with the pharmaceutical companies involved. And so the first step is actually registering it with an authority. It's called the TGA. It's the equivalent to the US FDA, which you hear about in all the television series. So we have an equivalent regulatory authority that looks at drugs and says, yes, we should allow this in the country. But then, in terms of getting it funded by Medicare, it goes to this PBAC committee. And you can see some of the timelines there. The PBAC committee first assess, is it safe? Does it work? How well does it work? Can we afford it? And then if they actually recommend it, and you can actually, they're very transparent, you can actually look them up on the website. You can find out when tafamidis is first submitted by a pharmaceutical company. They will tell you timelines of where it's up to in the stage. And you can even look up to see what pharmaceutical companies submit as proof. And so once they recommend it, there is usually a minimum of 4 months before the program opens. As you can imagine, there are final negotiations with the pharmaceutical company. The government does actually work out what it can afford, and so that can take some time. And then just setting it up, the governance, we have to actually, the doctors have to only enroll patients onto the Medicare program where it works. How are we going to get the forms right? How are we going to make sure the patients who are meant to get this medication get it? And so there's a lot of administration, a lot of governance as well. So minimum of 4 months from when you hear, oh my goodness, it's actually going to be on the program, to a doctor prescribing this for you. So a little bit of an idea of how that timeline worked for people with systemic AL amyloidosis. So you've already heard from Professor Kastridis, who was actually the lead author or the lead investigator on the trial that proved that it can actually help stop amyloid being made in people with light chain amyloid, and that people lived longer because of it. So that trial opened in May 2018. Recruiting patients, hundreds of patients around the world, including in Australia. And then the results were published to the medical community out there in their journals for all to see how fantastic it was. And then, as you can see very quickly afterwards, in that same year, 2021, the drug company registered into the country based on fantastic evidence. And clearly it was registered by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Unfortunately, when they submitted their proposal to the PBAC committee, it was rejected. You can actually look on the website as to why. And then they had to resubmit. When they did, a year later, PBAC said, yes, okay, this works. We will support your proposal of who you're going to offer the drug to, the financial agreement that we'll come up with you, and then the pharmaceutical company opened what I said was that medicine access program to fill the gap until the federal government could open the program, make sure the prescribers knew what they were doing, and knew that the paperwork was there, and ensuring that the doctors actually prescribed it for the right patient. They also work very closely with the pharmacists around the country to make sure that they understand the product and it's actually kept under the right conditions. So there's a lot to make sure everything happens right, a lot of logistics. And so then finally, daratumumab program opened on the 1st of January 2023. So from the trial, first recruiting patients around the world, 2018, to it becoming a drug funded by the government in 2023, there you can actually see the processes that were involved. And if you want to know some of the financial costs, I'll go into that a little bit later. Here we are. So this is what a doctor sees when they go onto the PBS website, because we always have to make sure that we fulfill all the right criteria. Are we prescribing this to people with newly diagnosed light chain amyloidosis? Because that is just the only group where we know it works. And so you can see all the criteria there that we have to forward all the information to the government about, and then we can actually prescribe it. And you can have a little look-see there at the actual costs that the government eventually negotiated. So for basically each, this is actually very confusing even for me, for I think it's actually one dispensation. So one injection, $7,000. So clearly that's a negotiated price. So again, these drugs are very difficult to afford if you want to try and self-fund. And then as an example, here's tafamidis. So the tafamidis criteria are way more complicated for people with cardiac ATTR. The reason being is that to come to that diagnosis is very complex, and some people, this ensures that people truly have that type of amyloid. There's a small minority of people that may actually have heart amyloid that is AL type. So this is helping guarantee that people are getting correctly diagnosed and that it is the heart TTR patients that are getting this drug tafamidis. So it's all in small print. I don't expect you to look at it, but this is our requirement as doctors who prescribe medicines. And so you can see there that the cost there for 1 month's worth negotiated by the government. Okay? So I think this all feeds back into reiterating that it all comes back to clinical trials. How does a drug actually first get put up and funded by the government is we need to prove it works, and we need to prove that it's not toxic or causes too many side effects, and we need to know how well it works. And there's many different stages of clinical research, and from phase 1 to phase 4, but that really is fairly academic. But everything is key is you need to prove that these medications are safe and work through enrolling into clinical trials. And these clinical trials go through the first phase where you're really testing in smaller numbers of people that it's safe, it's not damaging, there's not too many side effects, and then that it actually works, and then finding the right dose that works. So a lot of work. And then the phase 3 trials is where this is often, honestly, where the clinics around Australia pick up on which drugs have actually appear to be working. And they say, right, I'm going to put my hand up for the phase 3 trials. This is where you can enroll patients, and they're really just looking to expand the numbers to really prove that it's working really well, to really bring it home to all those governments around the world to actually have Medicare-like programs. I'm actually incredibly grateful to be working in Australia because many countries do not have Medicare-like programs or social welfare programs. And I really don't know how these other countries operate or how their doctors can possibly help their patients. It must be incredibly depressing for patients and doctors alike. So although I've just gone through how long it can take for these things to happen, I worked in an era where I had nothing except for clinical trials. I am grateful. I just want to run through the current clinical trials because really it gives you a sense of what's coming next. So for AL, this is the AL page. A lot of gobbledygook there because all drugs start off with non-catchy names. They've got letters and numbers. But essentially for now that we've got it covered with newly diagnosed light chain amyloidosis with daratumumab-based therapies, what happens when the disease comes back? So we've actually got two sets of drugs, and I'm just going to make it super easy. We've got drugs now that are antibodies that go in and eat away the amyloid that's left behind in your organs so that your heart repairs or so your kidney can repair. And then we've got new medications that target the cells that are making the amyloid a little bit better, but in a different way to daratumumab, so switching off the light chain. The details of these trials are on the AAN website, so it is, I must admit, even for doctors, really hard to read, is this trial right for me? Honestly, just show the website to your clinicians and say, hey, do I fit any of this? Do you reckon this is good for me? Okay, that's my tip. And then what's up next with transthyretin therapy? What could potentially be on Medicare in the future, or what could you enroll in now for your TTR disease? And be mindful, it's interesting now that we have drugs that work, many of these trials will allow you to remain on tafamidis, which is fantastic and entirely ethical and should be the way that things are done. So essentially, this group of drugs are very similar to what I described in terms of two groups of drug therapies. So the NTLA one, I showed the phase 1 result, just the header, that was all out in the papers relatively recently. It's actually a CRISPR or gene editing drug. One dose only to switch off making TTR amyloid. Again, be careful. There are set criteria of sort of the situation you're in that you may or may not fit into to enroll into the trial. And then similar to the AL world, there's also a trial currently, and these are trials that are open now in centres around Australia. And again, you can have a little look on the AAN website what they are. And so the second group is again a drug which has already gone through its phase 1-2 trials, which can dissolve TTR amyloid out from the heart. It was proven in the early trials safely. And this one is an infusion or a drug given through a drip once a month. So I think that's my hopefully short summary. I didn't keep time. Thank you.